Hello friends of WildRift and welcome back to another RiftGuides WildRift video, and for today we're going to take a look at DOP champions for the current patch. But before we hop into the video, what is your personal OP champion? Let me know in the comments below. Our first champion on this list is Caitlyn. Caitlyn as a champion got stealth buffed multiple times in the recent patch. For one, the attack speed influence on her first ability is finally in the game, which allows the ability to be cut short by almost like to 50% of its previous cast time, scaling with attack speed. The next thing that has been changed is the addition from Lord or of Lord Dominic's regard into the game. Now we have an accelerated item breakpoint for 80 carries, which is a big thing for Caitlyn. Caitlyn as a champion mostly deals damage with her auto attacks, so an item that grants her crit and armor penetration is a godsend for this champion. If you also combine this with the idea of the newly buffed Runan's Hurricane, you'll quickly realize that this champion is a force you have to reckon with, especially if the player realizes that you can play this champion from brushes and therefore gain headshots twice as fast. With this in mind, the newly introduced red buff sharing mechanic after the buff spawns 7 minutes into the game. Don't forget, the buff needs to be spawned after 7 minutes have already passed, then the buff is actually able to be shared. The champion, in combination with Kha'Zix from maybe a support champion, becomes a monster. The bonus damage you have from all of the different multipliers or tools you have to deal damage to multiple champions is crazy. Also for laning, this champion is way better than you imagine it to be. Number 1, you have an AoE ability that can deal a lot of damage to champions and the minion wave alike. Number 2, you have crazy range which you can abuse to punish enemies during the laning phase. Number 3, you have tools that stops enemies from walking into brushes with your traps. Number 4, you can even abuse the brushes to hit enemies from range to stack this headshot faster. But what is the strongest part about Caitlyn? Caitlyn is supposed or designated to win lane. She wants to stomp lane, get access to plates and destroy the people under their tower. With that in mind, you want any kind of aggression in lane and just pummel the enemy down and down and down. You want to force all the other enemy champions' attention towards you and then have your team play around you in a normal fight. Under normal circumstances, you will always win if you have the better champions on your team. Pairing Caitlyn with an enchanter is almost a normal and a given, because the damage you'll deal during the laning phase simply by being 2 ranged champions is crazy. The next champion that is quite broken on this list is Orianna. Orianna as a champion has been flying under the radar for quite some time, but this champion, given a little bit of time and with the current climate of solo queue, there will be plenty of time given to you, this champion will outperform almost everyone. The damage this champion provides is utterly insane. With the new phase rush, you will just speed around the map and have no trouble whatsoever. When it comes to items, you can implement a few tricks to make the game a little bit easier for you. Normally Orianna would struggle with mana, but with the new implementation of the buff sharing mechanic, you can maybe even skip the Tear of the Goddess. Previously you would go for Tear of the Goddess after completing your Luden's Echo, but now you can even go for a Sapphire Crystal start if you truly want to, because the 25 AP from the Amplifying Tomb don't or won't make as much of a difference as you think it does. With the mana given from the Sapphire Crystal, you have a nicer transition into the middle or the late game and just overall easier for you on the mana pool. But if you are very well and adept in managing your mana, you don't need this and can immediately rush towards your Luden's Echo, your Prophet's Pendant and then your Void Staff. With this, you'll have the most burst damage available. And sometimes, if you truly want to, you can even run an Electrocute setup to even put more emphasis on this burst damage type of gameplay. It's really crazy, and if you get used to it, you'll be surprised how much you can do. But let's be honest, from my perspective, I think Phase Rush is the best because it grants you the most mobility available and some cooldown reduction as well on your spells. And as you complete your build, you'll have the option to turn this little Prophet's Pendant into a Vacant Soul Stealer. With the Vacant Soul Stealer, you will get even more cooldown reduction as the fight goes on and you'll get kills. It's a lovely mechanic in the game. The next OP champion I want to talk about is an all-time monster of the game and will always remain to be a monster unless she gets significantly changed. I'm talking about Karma, my friends, and Karma is still broken. Karma is one of those champions that, if you're very good at her, will be a monster in this game. It doesn't matter what role you play her. Her presence in lane and her pressure in lane just destroys the opposition so brutally that unless they play very specific champions and are good at those champions, you'll have no trouble winning lane almost always, and that is guaranteed. And if this isn't enough, this champion scales like a monster and makes objective taking quite troublesome. She can use her empowered second ability to tag an enemy closer to her, to then have this debuff applied to an enemy closer to the enemy champion, and then they're forced to split ways. If they are not able to split ways, they'll just die, because the Karma will be able to use her ultimate and the meteor on top of her, which then resets her mantra to allow her to fire another empowered ability, in this case her first ability, right into the enemy's center. That way, you will destroy them before they can even do a single thing. But if there was one thing I need to tell you about this champion, it's about the aggression when it comes to playing this champion. You want to be an obnoxious piece of a demon that just attacks enemies on cooldown, proccing the area on the enemy champions for poke, running them down with the second ability and just poking them into the next game. Also, don't forget you can go for sneaky all-ins if you pay attention to your mantra. The goal in this instance is to get your second ability empowered to guarantee all of your other spells to hit. It will cause the enemy to panic, and if they don't get away from the binding, they'll get gunned down or take significant amounts of damage. The only way the enemy has a chance of trading back is having champions that can either proc Aftershock or have more raw damage than your Constellation in lane, which not many champions have to offer. One of the next most broken champions in this game is still an all-time classic, and it's Kha'Zix, this little lovely insect that everybody hates to face, but everybody loves to play. This champion is still a menace to reckon with, and if played properly, will take over any solo queue game there is. And the problem with this champion is just the raw amount of damage, and also another thing. I've said this probably a billion times, but I'll say it again. Duskblade of Draktar is the most broken item on this champion for the following reason. Duskblade will always tell you if you're seen. Being seen by a ward, a champion, or a tower, literally anything in the game, the item's buff effect will slowly decay. Paying close attention to this buff will allow you to never get caught, because your champion will always have an escape. For evolves, you always want to evolve your first ability, then most of the time your second, and then your third ability for the most consistent approach. Some more montage-oriented Kha'Zix players will tell you to go the first, into the third, to then the second ability. That way you can get your jump resets in and maybe snowball the game. But often, or more than often enough, you'll face situations in which you just can't jump in. But given the current solo queue context and the people you're facing, getting those resets is rather easy, and punishing them is super easy because they have no clue as to what they're doing. I'm talking about Grandmaster Typical Elo, which as of right now I think 12,000 people or plus are Grandmaster Plus in Europe, which is, I don't know, kinda weird to see. A bit too many for my taste, but who am I to judge? When it comes to Kha'Zix, there's only one thing you have to keep in mind. Your champion becomes a monster upon hitting level 5, because that's when you get your first evolve on your first ability, which significantly reduces your first ability's cooldown upon hitting just an isolated target. If that happens, you'll outrate almost anyone without any problem unless you get one-shot by the likes of a Lee Sin, which can happen sometimes. But here's something that a lot of players are not using when it comes to Kha'Zix. You can even invade early game if you know that the enemy champion is going to get rather low during your jungle clear or is rather slow. The reason is the following. Enemy champions around jungle camps will always count as isolated anyway. That way you can abuse the bonus damage from your first ability and just demolish the opposition. The last champion on this list is Vex. Vex is one of those champions that scales with your ability to play the champion very well. If you are very troubled with using your camera or just overall having an oversight of what is happening in the fight, this champion is nothing for you. But if you're well at everything and just know what happens in a fight and can already picture what is going to happen in the future, this champion will be broken for you. This champion can engage, disengage, burst, and do everything you want from a mage champion. But you need to be very good to pilot this champion. Every spell you use is a potential game changer in both directions. You can fear and demolish the enemy champions, or you can mess up the combo and just die instantaneously. It all depends on you. But if you play this champion well, you can deny every champion in this game anything that they can do. Because once they go into you, they're always at the fear of getting instantaneously feared by your passive, if you use an ability like your second ability while your passive is available. If that happens, it's very risky for them because they are probably going to die instantaneously. On the flip side, if you are able to hit your ultimate onto the backline of the enemy team and see that they don't have a stasis enchant, you can just go in, blast your entire combo and go into stasis yourself. That way your teammates can move up and clean up right after you. Alternatively, you can follow up on an engage with your ultimate, or you just peel for the backline. The limits are simply set to what you can imagine and what you can mechanically do. but this champion definitely deserves a very high placement on any list, and this champion is broken if you properly learn how to use the champion. Especially with the Prophet's Pendant, Ludens and Void Staff setup, you'll have a lot of damage far earlier than you can imagine, especially with Electrocute. And that's it for today's video. If you liked the video and want some more content, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Rift Guides content in the future. See you soon.